the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Samach Beis. We left off discussing what happens if you have various parim or various seidim, as for example, previous sugya, during the avodah of the sprinkling of the dam, the blood fully spilled out, and therefore we needed to shecht another animal. So we can have, as the example would be, that there was a spilling of the blood that happening in middle of the Kodesh HaKodshim avodah. So you brought another, you shechted another animal. Then it happened again when you were sprinkling towards the paraychas. Then it could have spilled again, sometimes in the middle of the sprinkling on the mizbeach. So at the end, you can have various korbanos. And the Gemara actually was speaking both about what do we do with the remains of those bulls, what do we do with the remains of the seidim. We're speaking about the seidim Lashem. Normally, the rule is all animals whose bloods are sprinkled inside, certainly on Yom Kippur, it's even lifnai v'lifnim and lifnim. Then after you pour the dam on the shirayim on the Yesod HaMizbeach, the animals have to be taken out of the temple complex. Actually, they're taken completely chutz of Yerushalayim and they are burned there. On top of that, the Kohanim that are involved in that avodah, they and the garments that they are wearing also becomes tummy. So the question is, does those dinim take effect on all of the burnings of all of the animals? That was the last topic that we had. And we had a machloikes tanoim. We had the Braisa, the Tanakama says that indeed all of the animals have to undergo the same burning chutz l'Yerushalayim, chutz l'shalosh machnes, and the begadim, and the person becomes tamei, and that was Rab Lazar and Rab Shimon on all of them. And actually, that's Rab Lazar and Rab Shimon l'shitasi that holds that even a complete avodah, even when avodah is incomplete, it doesn't allow us to completely disregard the animal, as we explained in the last year, Gavaldik. So that's l'shitasam. All of them are connected to the avodah. They are all counted. And then we had the Chachamim that said that the dinim that the Torah speaks about only happens with the last one because hoyel v'gamar boy kapara. That's where we left off. Now the opened end, the loose end that has to be tied, and we'll start today's share with that, is that when we have a sa'ir whose blood is spilled out, therefore you have to shecht another sa'ir, there's another detail. And that is you never just bring one sa'ir. You have to always bring two se'idim and make a goydel. And one of them will be indeed Lashem. But that will mean that aside of the last issue of what do we do with the carcass of these se'idim Lashem, what do we do with the se'idim that were designated La'azazel? Same question. Are we going to say that we only used one sa'ir La'azazel? Or in this scenario, will the kohen, the ish'iti, that's going to be taking the sa'ir La'azazel here, will take all of the se'idim? That will be the first opening question, with which we're going to conclude the Pedic with. We're going to have Shitas Rabbi Yossi Mitzvah Barashayna. We'll see that that's not only unique to the Seidim, but that's a general rule. And we will start today the 6th chapter. That's the Pedic of Shnei Seidei, beginning with the din that the two he-goats that are going to be used for the Goydel, ultimately one Lashem and one La'azazel, they have to have the three similarities. They have to be shovin b'mara. They have to look alike. They have to have the same appearance. And we'll learn that Rashi, the same appearance is referring to their color, either both white or both black or both gray. They have to have the same koima. They have to have the same height, ubedamim, and they have to have the same financial value. Now, what we will learn on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis is that this is not the only time where korban nois have to be brought, and they have to be similar, at least on the lachatchila level, b'mara, b'koima, ubedamim. We're going to see where this din is not similar, where they don't have to be equal, and we'll figure out why. And towards the end of Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis, we're going to open up with the sugya that will go into Daf Samach Gimel, that will go further, and that is the sugya of shchutei chutz. Now there is a pasuk in Achrei Mois, after the Torah speaks about the Avodah of Yom Kippur. And the Torah writes that all karbanos must be brought in front of Hashem, meaning in the temple complex. And if a person does not do that, then the person is subject to kares. The nichras ishahu mikerev amoy. However, Chazal are medayik that when is one going to be, God forbid, chayiv kares or b'shoigig, therefore I have to bring a chatos for shchutei chutz, for bringing a carbon that needed to be bring bifnim. The person brought it bachutz. Chutz means outside the temple complex, even on harabayis. Certainly, if he brings it outside harabayis, that's only if that carbon was fit, was ra'ui to be brought bifnim. And therefore, it should have been brought b'fnim. And therefore, if you bring it b'chutz, you're going to be chayiv. But if the carbon is not a ra'ui to be brought lifnei Hashem, and someone went ahead and he brought it b'chutz, so the din of kares and chatos does not apply. That will be the opening statement. Now we're going to have to define what does it mean that it is fit, what does it mean that it's not fit. We're going to be speaking about karbanos that are mechuser zman. For example, a carbon has to be 8-day-olds or older, b'chlal, for it to be brought for any carbon. So Rab Chizda is going to tell you that ein mechuser zman leboy bayoim. We'll explain what that means. Rab Chizda also defines clearer that fit or unfit is if there is a problem in the carbon itself, as we will explain the Rishonim. If there is a problem which does not allow us to bring a carbon, but it's not in the carbon, it is, for example, that the soir la'azazel can only be brought after many steps happen prior to it. Now, prior to all those steps, even though de facto you can't yet do the avoid of the soir la'azazel, but it's not a problem in the animal itself or any other soir from Musaf that's brought in on Yom Kippur, that you have to only bring the Musaf after all of the avodas that we have prescribed. But that's not called a lack in the carbon itself. That's only that things that needed to happen prior did not happen. And therefore, if that carbon will be brought b'chutz, even prior to its being fit to be brought b'fnim, technically, it's not called an animal that's not fit to be brought b'fnim, and the person will be chayiv kares or chatos b'shoigig if it's brought b'chutz, and a lot more about shchutei chutz. Chavra, let us start on Daf Samach Aleph Amid Beis. We left off 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. So again, we had the sugya right above it speaking about what happens to the padim or to the seirim if there's more than one because the blood's spilled out. Of course, you have to take it and you have to burn it mechutz lamachna, but will the dinim that the person who does it becomes tamei and the begadim become tamei, will it apply only to the last one or to all of them? That is subject to the machlokes tanoim. And now, same scenario, but only by the soir, the blood of the soir Lashem spilled out. We needed to bring a new soir Lashem. You can't just take another soir and shecht it. You have to now bring 2 seirim and make a goydel, and the one that comes out Lashem will be slaughtered to continue the avodas hadamim. But that's going to mean that you're going to have more than one soir lazazel, and now boi minei rava mirav nachman kama seirim mishaleach. In such a scenario, one, whether you have 2, whether you have 10, doesn't matter how many you have. If you have many seirim that underwent a goydel, do we only send one, or do we sell? And then the question will be, which one? Or do we have to taka, send, and ultimately push off the cliff all? So Amalei responds Rav Nachman, V'chi edroi mishaleach. What's even the havamina? What do you think? You have to send the whole herd? Of course not. Avada, only one is going to be sent la'azazel. So Amalei, so asks Rava back to Rav Nachman, hold on. In the previous sugya, when we were focusing on the many parim that could come to be, the many seirim lashem that could come to be, and we had the shita of Rabbi Eliezer and Rab Shimon that say that they are all burnt al beis hadeshen with all of the dinim, and there we don't say v'chi edroi sarif. So just like at least some Tanoim hold that all of them have to undergo all of the steps with all of the pratim, maybe here also in the rear scenario where you have more than one soir lazazel, maybe edrei mishaleach. So answers the Gemara, no, midami. Why? Hasam over there, in the case of the parim and the seirim, the soir lashem, the Torah doesn't use the word oisai. Oisai is in the singular, that it is sent. And therefore, at least according to some Tanoim, you have to do everything, all of the steps, with all of the pratim, to all of the parim and all of the seirim lashem. But hachi over here, by the soir lazazel, the Torah writes, lishalach oisoi la'azazel. The Torah could have written lishalach la'azazel. Here it says oisoi, so indeed, l'kula alma, only one soir will be sent la'azazel. So now comes the subsequent question. Oy bazoi, which one from the many? Even if it's two, the first or the second, or if there's three, the first or the last. So here we have a machlokes. So Itmer, Rav Papi in the name of Rava holds Rishoin Mishaleach. However, Rab Shimi Mishmei de Rava Amar Achroin Mishaleach. Gavaldik. I just want to point out that it was Rava that asked the boy from Rav Nachman. That means at a certain time, Rava had at least a havamina that they are all sent. So it's amazing that Rav Nachman was the one that clearly told Rava only one. Yet, whether Rava's din came from Rav Nachman, that's not written in the Gemara. So that was at a later time, at least Rav Shimi's version in the name of Rava, Rav Papa, in the name of Rava was, which one is the one that's going to be sent? Now, Bishleim Rav Shimi, right, Barashi, or just Rav Shimi, in the name of Rava, the Amar Achron Mishaleach, at least that's going to follow the sheet of the Chachamim regarding the par, right, which one will affect Tumah. And he says that only the last one, the logic of the Tana was Hoyel, Ugamar, Vegamar by Kapara. So now that we established we only do it with one, but we find a precedent that the unique status is with the final one. So he applied it here as well. Ela Rav Papi Bishmei de Rava, Maikosava. Maikosava means what would be the logic? Why with the first? Answers the Gemara, Savar Law. Because Rava holds that what? Kirabi Yosi, that there is a general rule, which he will now apply over here, the rule of Rabbi Yosi, the Amar, that mitzvah, barishoin. Whenever there is an option of two or more, the mitzvah is with the first. And here also, the mitzvah will be with the first. Hi, Rabbi Yosi, where do we find this Rabbi Yosi? Ilem says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi, the kupais, Rabbi Yosi, that opined, Benegea, the baskets, did Tanan, Chavra Mishnah Shkolim, that when it comes to the removing of the half a shekel from the Lishkas HaShkolim in the Beis HaMikdash, so aside of the din that we remove it 3 times a year, if you remember that, and then there was a machlekes, is it 2 weeks before Yom Tov, more or less connected to the 3 Yom Tovim, but that every time that it was removed, how was it removed? So we have in the Mishnah that what? That shalosh kupais, shalosh sa'in, right? Or actually it's Rabbi Yosi Omer, that every time he went in there, that means the kohen that was going to remove the money from the chamber, he would go in there with 3 baskets. Each one was large enough to have in it 3 sa'a. Shebahem toimenes alishka. In other words, he didn't remove it from one or in one container. He removed 3 containers from that which was inside. And and on these 3 kupas, each one had a number in the way of a letter, which is Aleph, Beis, Gimel. So kupa Aleph, kupa Beis, kupa Gimel. And Vitanya, whether you were Goyres Rabbi Yosi above or not, but at least here is where we're quoting Rabbi Yosi, that Amar Rabbi Yosi, Lama Kasav Aleim, Aleph, Beis, Gimel. And the answer is, Leida Eza Mehem, Nitra Marishayno. Don't forget, the kohen who's removing the money doesn't walk out holding all of the 3 baskets at the same time. He goes in there, he removes basket number 1, he goes in again. This is all before each of the 3 Yom Tovim. It means it's done a total of 9 times. But 3 are done together. So 1 goes back in, 2 goes back in, 3. And why did he mark Aleph, Beis, Gimel? Because since the first basket was the first removed, so now when we begin using the money from the baskets for all of the karbanos tzibur, etc., you dafka take it from basket Aleph first. Lahavi heimenu rishain shemitzvah barishain. And if you wouldn't mark the baskets, then you would take maybe the first time money from kupa number 2 or from kupa that you took out the third. And there's a concept of mitzvah barishain. And now the Gemara is saying logically, we apply the same logic over here. That the soil la'azazel that was designated Rishon, it's going to one that's going to be used. Says the Gemara, that cannot be the Rabbi Yosi, because there is a fundamental difference. What's the difference? Over there, Dilmon, bo'idna de ischazoi kamaisom, over there by Shkolim, lo ischazoi basraiso. When Kupa Aleph was removed from the Lishkas HaShkolim, again, the Kohen wouldn't walk out there holding all 3 baskets together. He would walk out holding 1 basket and he would place it wherever it was placed. In other words, there was a moment that there was only basket Aleph. The Bechlal wasn't basket base. So basket base was non-existent. And a Hanami, over there, even though he wouldn't just stop there, but there was only 3 times a year you can remove money. And the quantity needed to be the quantity that fits in 3 baskets. So we did Aleph and then Beis and then Gimel. Since there was a moment that you only had Aleph, it makes the coins in basket Aleph more chashuv. You got to use those first. But over here, if you think about it, the Se'irim La'azazel are not activated or they are not fit to be taken La'azazel only after all of the prior steps are done, as we're learning about the Chashivus of Seder. Now, in the case that we are speaking about, so the kohen is sprinkling the dam of the soid sometime inside, and the blood spills out. Now, the cup, the mizrak drops. It can happen. All the blood spilled out. Good. So he goes back outside and he does again another goydel, and now he has another soir lashem, and therefore there's another soir lazazel. Let's just speak. There are 2 se'irim lazazel. Neither of them are fit until he gets up to the point in the avodah where he finished the shirayim dam, which is more or less where we're up to. He finished pouring all of the bloods, even on the outer altar on the Yisoid. At a certain point, now is the time to take the soid la'azazel. At that time, you already had the 2 or the 3 se'irim la'azazel. Prior to this time, none of them were fit to be brought. It wasn't their time yet. When it's the time to be brought, you already have at the same time all of them ready. So why are you even considering one Rishon? It's dissimilar to the case of the baskets. Now, I know that in time, there was one Be'en there before the other. True, but it wasn't fit yet. It wasn't Chazoi. In the case of the Shkolim, the basket Aleph Taku was Chazoi. Basket base did not exist. Maybe only over there does Rabbi Yossi say mitzvah Borishon. So Ella, the Gemara says...
Rabbi, I'm a little confused. With the Sar Lazazel, that has to match up with the Sar Lashem. So if the first one spilled out, now you have to do a new pair and a new guide roll.
Yes.
So now that first Lazazel is no longer a fit for the Sar Lashem.
So Danny, what you're asking, very good. Bashgacha Prat is the way they organize the Shas. What you're asking is mamish the topic of the next Pedic. Even though that next daf Samach Beis, Samach Gimel, will still be focusing on the first statements of the Mishnah, but the first daf Samach Daled, if I'm not mistaken, will begin discussing exactly that. In other words, whenever there's more than one goydel, b'chlal, and one of them will not be used, which one will be used, which one won't be used? That's a big topic. What you're asking is a big topic. It's a Mishnah, and then there is a machlokes how to understand the Mishnah. Correct. Like even there's other scenario. I just speak out. I want to just give more words to your question. Forget about blood spilling out. You always have to have a pair. So you made a goydel. You had 2 seirim. One was lashem. What happens if the la'azazel dies? You can't do the avodah of the soy lashem because it doesn't have its counterpart. Same thing. You have to bring 2 animals. And you make a new goydel. Now you're going to have 2 that are living lashem. Which one of the 2 do you bring? It's more or less what you're saying, Danny. That's a big discussion. Very good. And you can make comparisons, but we don't need to go there. The concept, mitzvah barishon. Now again, coming back over here, where do we have mitzvah barishon? Even if 2 animals are only fit to be brought from a certain point onwards. And from that point, halachically, they're both there together. So we say that since there was one here before, even though it wasn't fit, we still do that first. Where do we find that? El Rabbi Yossi in Pesach, by Pesachim. And here, the Tanan, or on the side, it's a Braisa de Tanya, Hamafresh Pischai, the classical case of losing a carbon. You designated the Pesach. Before Pesach, and you lost it. And you're not going to start looking for it. You right away designated another one. Guys, this is all before the 14th. This is all before you brought it. You designated 2 animals, and now you found the first one. So the din. Now there's a nuance over here. If the Braisa only would have been speaking about you finding it after Chatzos, here again you can argue that there was a moment when there was the Zman of the Chiyuv to bring the Korban Pesach where you only had one. Okay, that's mamash rishon, like by the baskets. But this Braisa doesn't go into that, which means that the din of the Braisa of you losing and then you finding, and the Braisa says that either Tanakama, and Rabbi Yossi says, no, mitzvah barishon. That is like Rashi says, that's even if you found the original one before Chatzois, and that makes it exactly like our case. Why? Because also it's a technical thing. Before Chatzois, you don't have a chiyuv to bring the Korban Pesach. The moment the Zman HaChiyuv came, at that moment you had two animals. The fact that you designated one animal on the 12th and then you designated another one on the 13th, neither of them were chazoi, were fit. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yossi says, which one of these two do you bring? The one that you designated first, even though it wasn't fit yet to be brought. And then there's a nuance. Ve'im, hoya, sheni, mufchar mimenu. If it's better, if it's nicer, so then mimenu yivianu. But if not for them being nicer, just before looking into the individual carbon, here is where we find the Shitas Rabbi Yotzi, that mitzvah barishain, even if the chiyuv, the chalois chiyuv comes when you have two available at the same time. But since you designated one Pesach prior to the other, that one should be brought first. And the same thing will be over here, that the one that was designated la'azazel first should be the one, now that we accept Rav Nachman's answer, that v'chi edroi mishaleach, it's only one. So the first one is going to be the one sent, and that will be according to all of the Tanoim. And with that we say, Hadran Allah, we'll come back to you, God willing, and let us start now the 6th chapter, journeying through the Avodah of Yom Kippur. It's so geschmack after all this, the upcoming Yom Kippur, when we're going to read the Seder HaAvodah, Pasha to appreciate it more. Okay. So let's go. Says the Mishnah, Shnei Seirei Yom HaKippurim, the two he-goats, upon which we already spoke before the goydel is made. Says the Mishnah, mitzvasan. Mitzvasan does not mean ma'akev b'di'evet. Mitzvasan means the preferred way, right? This is many times we have like elachatchila, even mido'eraisa. Mitzvasan shiyu shneim shavin. They should ideally be both similar. How should they be similar? In 3 dinim. Bemara, appearance, look inside the Rashi. Appearance is color. They should both be white. Rashi says they should both be black. They should both be sechufim. Sechufim is like as a grayish. And ubekoima, they should both have the same height. And ubedamim, they should both have the same value. Now there is another din. We're not putting it together, but there's a separate din. And what's the separate din? Uveli ki chasan ki echad. Ideally, buy them with one transaction. Now, buying them from one transaction does not mean that you have to buy it from the same person. You can buy both because they have to be equal. Maybe the seller Reuven has one goat, the seller Shimon has the second goat, and only they have it equal. So the way to buy 2 goats from 2 different balabatim in one transaction is by having both of them appoint one shliach to effect the transaction. Because the lekicha happens when you do the Maisa Hakinyan. So if the one who's doing the Maisa Hakinyan represents both sellers, Amachaya, then you can have this again, this lechatchila dekadin, that its transaction, the lekicha should be ka'achas. Now the Mishnah says on both of these dinim, they should be equal with the 3 details. And you should buy them together. It can be even if they don't have any of the 3 similar, or if they don't have all of the 3 in the similar, they're not perfectly seven. B'di'evet, it's kosher. So the Mishnah is being very explicit that it's a lachatchila dikadin, and also that the second din, that it should be ubeleki chasam ke'echad, is only mitzvasan. But if lakach echad ayem ve'echad amachar, and it doesn't mean today and tomorrow, it means not at the same moment. Also b'di'evet, it's kosher. Okay, that's the beginning of the Mishnah. Nachadin. And this din is what we just mentioned before. Now, this second din of the Mishnah is going to be unpackaged a few daf ahead. We have to first cover the first part of the Mishnah. And that is that if meis echad mehem, if one of the 2 died, so the first thing you have to clarify before we come to what the solution will be is, when did they die? The most important marker is, was the goydel done or was the goydel not done? So here the Mishnah is very good. Im actually higril meis. Any one of the 2 before the goydel happened. So here it's simple. What's pshat simple? Here you don't need to get 2 as a replacement because really nothing happened yet. Yikach zug lasheni. Buy another one, right? And now you have 2. What are you going to tell me? Oh, but you did not buy them together. True, you did not buy them together, but that's based on what we just learned, that ubeliki chasam ke'echad is only mitzvasan. It's not ma'akev. So only buy one. Now you don't even know yet which one is Lashem. That's the whole point. However, here we start. Freilach, you already made the goydol, and the nakuda will be is that each sa'ir's validity is only because of it has a counterpart. That's the words we're going to use. The whole time. So if there is a rega that whichever one, there is no counterpart, so the other one is also not good. Now, that's going to really lead us in, that's not for now, that's not even for the next stuff. The whole concept of the choyin, that means something was fit, then it became rejected. Dachui. Do you have the choyin al balachayim? Do you not have the choyin al balachayim? Is something that's nitcha, can it become fit again? All of that will be negate to how you interpret the Mishnah. These are beautiful shasugis. But at this moment, neither of them are fit because one, the living one, doesn't have a counterpart. And what you cannot do is just buy another one. What needs to happen is yavi zug achad. You have to bring a new pair. And now you have to make another goydel. The yagred aleim batchila. Batchila means not lechatchila. Batchila means you have to make nocha. You have to make a new goydel. But here you're going to have a extra animal. And the Mishnah goes into the details. But and the Yomar in shel shei meis, in the case where the one that was already designated Lashem was the one that died. So you have one Azazel that's living, guys. That means you're going to end up with having two Azazels, right? Obviously, that will be the only option. The im shel Azazel meis. So first of all, you should know that but whichever one did not die, now will have a competitor, right? Because you're going to have, if the Lazazel died, you have a living Lashem. Now that you make a new Geidel, you're going to have two Lashem. So what do you do with, the Mishnah says the second one. You know what's not clear? Which second one? Which one is the second one? That we're going to leave for the Gemara. That will be a machloikus. What is the second one? Is the first one the second one, or is the second one the second one? Now, whichever one is the sheni, the beautiful thing here is that even though the seidim are in the category of chatos, and we have a rule, the general halacha l'moshe Sinai, regarding the 5 chatos shemesos, so you would think, whichever one will not be used has to be left to die in the kippah. Says the Mishnah, that's a machlokes tanoim. Lav dafka. Why lav dafka? We just had this not that long ago. Because there are some who have the opinion that the 5 chatois hamesos is only by a carbon yachid, and this is a bona fide carbon sibur. This isn't even a carbon of shutfim. The seirim is for all the yidden. V'hasheni yirache yistoiv, like most other carbonis, not the chatos. First, it has kedusha saguf. You can't just sell it now. You have to wait until it gets blemished. Of course, you can't make a blemish be a dayim. So you allow it to pasture until when naturally there's a blemish. Then v'yimkar, you have to sell it. So at least the animal is redeemed. The money is imbued with kedusha. Even though it's coming from a chatos, you can't stand bring a chatos. That's the general rule. V'yipru damav linadava. And this is the classical kates hamizbeach oilas nadava, oilas sibur. You can ask a kasha, hold on, it's a chatos. A chatos is the halacha l'moshe Sinai, that if you have 2 chatois, the one that won't be used should be left to die. So the Tanach says, the chachamim hold, she'ein chatos sibur mesa. That's the lachatchila, that's the whole halacha l'moshe Sinai, was only by a carbon yachid. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He doesn't have that tradition. He says that whichever one is the sheni tamus. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha l'moshe Sinai is even by a carbon sibur. And now the final stanza in the Mishnah, va'oid amar Rabbi Yehuda, he adds something. We're going to have a gavaldik gemara on this. That nishbach hadam. Now, Danny, that's connected to the sugya we learned in the last daf. So let's give nishbach hadam. Obviously, is the soil Lashem, which is what we learned about in the last pedic. So you already began to do the avoid. The soil Lashem was slaughtered. If the dam is spilled out, so says Rabbi Yehuda, Yamus hamishtaleyach. Yamus hamishtaleyach. This is l'cha'oira obvious because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the din halacha l'moshe Sinai that a chatos that you don't need, it's not usable, is left to die. By the way, both are chatos. Not only is Hashem chatos, both seidim are in the class of a chatos. So you have to get another peer. What do you do with this soid amishtaleyach? So it's left to die. And similarly, if mes hamishtaleyach, so you can't use the dam, but you can't say let it die. Letting it die by the blood means yishboy chadam. Yishboy chadam. A lot more in the Gemara. I mean, the challenge with this last stanza is, well, this is mamish, an outcome of Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that Thomas. Why did he have to spell it out in this case? Chavra, we're going to leave that for much more later. Okay, now Samach Beis Amud Beis. We're going to begin focusing on the source of the first din of the Mishnah. Not that they have to be brought together, but on the first din of the Mishnah, that mitzvasan, which means it's the preference is they should be shavin b'mare u'b'koima u'b'dam. Where does that come from? Tana Rabbanan. So we are going here. It's amazing. This is an Achrei Mois. This is in the beginning of the Avodah of Yom Kippur. So that's Vayikra Tez Zayin Pasuk Hey. Steht in the pasuk like this: Umeyeis adas b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei seirei. Seirei in itself is a lashon rabim, and that will be a big part of this amud. That whenever Hashem writes shnei and the next word is in plural, the word shnei is superfluous, because even if Hashem would not have written two, the klal is the minimum of plural is two, and if Hashem doesn't specify otherwise, the presumption of plural is two by default. So Shnei Seirei is taka extra. Shnei Seirei izim lachatos, and then an ayil echad lo'oil. So the Braisa tells us Yikach Shnei Seirei izim. So the Braisa asks, listen, miut Seirei without the word Shnei, just Seirei is Shnei, plural. The minimum of plural is two. So ma Talmud loim Shnei. So on this the answer is shiur Shneim shavin. That's the source. Now we're going to see that this is taka by other times. The Torah speaks about other karbanos. We're going to learn a lot of chidushim over here, because it's really common. The only place that we won't apply it, which is probably the most common, because we read it every Rosh Chodesh, mamish in the beginning of the parsha, right? Kvasim and Neshana Timimim, Shnayim Layoim. Again, Kvasim, right? It's Shnayim. Right? So when it says Shnayim Layoim, that will be the only place that we don't apply it, and we'll see why. But every time that God writes two, plural, the two is telling us that there is a lachatchila din of Shneim Shavim. Now says the Braisa Minayin Afal Pisha Ein Shneim Shavim Ksherim. How do you know that it's only lachatchila? Now, before we go on, guys, we should already have the problem with this clause. The problem is that by Kachim, we have a few unique dinim. The one that we learned the most recently is that you don't make a hekesh, you don't make a double hekesh by kachim. But what we learned here a lot more often is the other klal by kachim, and that is that only when shana b'hakasuv, then it is la'akev. Either by kachim Hashem has to repeat something twice, and you also have certain key words like chukah, like tihiyah. There are certain key words that without that key word, if Hashem only wrote a din once by any of the karbanos, it doesn't mean it's ma'akev. It only means lechatchila. For some reason, the Braisa already knows that this should be ma'akev. Why? We'll see. So maybe this is taka be ma'akev. That means af uminayin. And so how do you know that if they're not b'diavad shavim, they will still be kosher? Oh, so we quoted Chavra Vayikra Tazayin Pasuk Hey. It's amazing. In Pasuk Tes and in Pasuk Yud. To get through the daf, you can open up a chumash, you'll see the Torah writes in each one of those psukim, referring to these goats, the word sa'ir that did not need to be mentioned because we are already speaking about the sa'ir. Twice, pasuk tes, pasuk yud. So Talmud leimer, sa'ir, that's being marbe. Telling you, even any goat. Twice, to tell you, even if b'diavad it wasn't shneim shavim. End of Braisa. Now the Gemara asks what we spoke out already. Talmud Rabbi Rachmana. Like, I need to have this extra soir. Haloi Rabbi Rachmana. Why was the Braisa asking Hava mina psulim? Why? Ikuva min olam. Ikuva min olam means there isn't over here a shana olav akosov la'akev. We don't have shnei seirim written twice. We don't have an extra shnei. It's only written once. So that always means only preferred. So the Gemara says it's not true. It is written. It's written more. Actually, aside of the word Shnei that's written in Pasuk Hey, open up a chumash. You have in Pasuk Zayin the word Shnei Seirim, and in Pasuk Ches. So really, Sakadai Techamina, Shnei Ksiv. Hey, Zayin, Ches. So actually, it is a Shana Ba'akas of La'akiv. But to counter that, God wrote Soir Soir. But now, asks the Gemara, V'hashta the Rabbi Rachmana Soir Soir. So Taka, why? Shnei, Lamali. Gavaldik. So that's the answer. Chad Lamara, V'chad L'koima, V'chad L'damim. Because if not for the 3 times Shnei, I might have thought that this din of Shavin is only regarding one of these 3. How do we know it's for all of these 3? From the 3 times that Hashem writes, Shnei Seir. Again, obviously, this is all the Torah Shabbat Peh. It's really, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that the mitzvah lechatchila should be Shavin in all the 3. This is the way we find the remes in the Torah for all these din. Okay, now we're going to go away from Yom Kippur just for a short while. And we're going to see what's always better, a consistency with this type of limud. So let's go to the next case. Tanya nami hachi gabe kivesei mitzoira. All right, the 2 lambs of a mitzoira. Now, if the mitzoira is poor, there will not be 2 lambs. There's only going to be a lamb la'asham. But if the mitzoira is wealthy, so from the 3 karbanos, forget about the asham, from the chatas and the oila, right, one of them will be a keves. So you have a total of 2 lambs. And what does it say in the pasuk? This is a pasuk Chevra Mitzoira, which is Vayikra Yud Dalid. Just to know the psukim to chap what we're speaking about. This is pasuk Yud, the beginning. And when does the Mitzoira bring all of these 3 karbanos? Mamash at the last step of his purification process, which is what the Torah calls Ubayoy Mashmini. And the pasuk writes Ubayoy Mashmini Yikach Shnei Kivasim Temimim. Same kasha Chevra. Shnei Kivasim Temimim. If the Torah would have written Yikach Kivasim Temimim, same logic. Miyut Kivasim is Shnai. We would have known it's 2. And then the Kafsa Achas Bashanosa Temima. Right, the 1 female sheep. Right, the ewe. So it says Yikach Shnei Kivasim. That's pasuk Yud. Same braisa. So Miyut Kivasim, had the Torah not written Shnei, just Kivasim, well, plural Shnayim. So Ma Talmud Leimer Shnei. So there we have the same din. Is indeed to tell you Shiu Shneim Shavin. And here again the Braisa continues. Same Braisa. Uminayin Sha'afal Pisha Ein Shneim Shavin B'di'evet. It's going to be okay. Here the same kasha. Why would you think if it's not Shana Ba'akas of La'akiv? The Gemara is going to ask that again and answer it. So Talmud Leimer. Now we quoted pasuk Yud in pasuk Yud Beis and in pasuk Yud Gimel. The Torah is speaking about these lambs, and without the word keves, we would have known we're speaking about the lamb. So there's a keves, and that is being marbe that even if they're not shavin. So again, that's the end of the Brais. Same Gemara. You had an extra pasuk base, pasuk gimel keves. Holy Rabbi Rachmana have a min psulim. Why kuvamin alon? Because there isn't a shana ba'akas of la'akev. Of course, it's only lechatchila. It's only hinted to once, says the Gemara. Here, we're not finding a shana la'akasuv. Here, there are other key words that makes the dinim li'ikuva, which is, we have by Yom Kippur, we have the words chukah we learned above. Here, by Mitzoira, the parsha begins, zois tihiyah toiras ha-Mitzoira. Tihiyah in English means, it shall be. Azoi dav zayin li'ikuva. Salka da'itachamina tihiyah ksiv. So that's why we have the kevesh in Yud Beis Yud Gimel to tell you that this din is not liikuva. Now, hashta the Rabbi Rachmana keves. So for what do we apply the tihiyah? What dinim in Parshas HaMitzoira are essential? The Gemara says that's not a kasha. L'shar haviyosei shel Mitzoira regarding all the other details. All the details there are liikuva. And Tanya. Okay, so that's 2. So we have Shnei Seirim, the din that they have to be shavin, the Marabakayim Adamim is mitzvasan, but it's not ma'akev. We have the same din by the Kivesei Mitzoira. And now let's go weiter. The Tananami, it's really a Braisa, as we have in the side of Tanya, Gabi Mitzoira, don't jump. It's another din of the Mitzoira. This is in the first of the 7 days, in the beginning of the purification of the Mitzoira. The Torah speaks about us taking, right, that 2 birds. The pasuk writes that's Perek Yudalid, pasuk Dalid, a few psukim prior. It says V'tziva hakoyin, v'lokach la mitayer shtei tziparim chayos tohoros. You shecht one on ma'im chayim v'chulei. So it says again. It says shtei tziparim. Same kasha. Tziparim miu tziparim shnayim or shtayim. The pasuk says shtayim in the feminine. So matam olayim shtei to tell you that these two birds sheyu shteiam shavos. Uminayin she'afal pi she'ein shavos still b'diavad ksheiros Talmud Leimer. And here this Talmud Leimer we quoted pasuk Dalid. So the Talmud Leimer is from pasuk Hey and from pasuk Vav. The Torah there says the word tzipor, the ganze tzipor was superfluous because we're speaking about the birds. So tzipor, tzipor, riba. And the Bryce and the same Gemara. Tama the Rabbi Rachmana. Holy Rabbi Rachmana, the tzipor, you would think psulais. It's ma'akev. Why? Why would you think it's ma'akev if there isn't a shana b'hakosov? Answers the Gemara again because the parsha begins zois tiya toiras. Sakalei the chamino tiya ksiv. And that's why you need to have the tzipor from pasuk K and pasuk Vav. Again, v'hashto the Rabbi Rachmana tzipor. So tihiyah is for what? There's so many details by the Mitzvah. So the Gemara answers again. We're not even going through all of them. L'shar hava yosi shal Mitzvah. No, there are only two exceptions. That what? That the shnei kivasim temimim b'diyevet don't have to be similar, and the shtei tziparim b'diyevet don't have to be similar. Now asks the Gemara. So we have this din de facto by three, one here and two others. Really, we'll see there's another one. But the kasha is Iyachi Gabi Timidim Nami Parshas Pinchas, right? Kvasim B'nei Shana Timimim Shnayim Layoim. Kvasim Mir Kvasim Shnayim. So why did the Torah have to stay Shnayim? This is the Gemara making up a brisa. Like, why don't we have such a brisa? Why don't we have such a Torah Shabbat Peh? Why don't we say that Shiyu Shneim Shavim? And you know what? We can go further. We can make the whole brisa. This could have been that we're speaking about Chevra, the daily Talmud, the one in the morning, the one in the afternoon. Because you can argue, Talmud Leimer, we quoted Pinchas, which is Bamidbar, Pedek, Chavches, Pasuk Gimel. Pasuk Gimel writes, Chavas in the nation, Mishnah, Aliyah. In Pasuk Dalid, the next Pasuk, it says Keves. And not once, twice, they're both extra. We could have said the Gansa B'raisa, Keves Riba. Right? Bottom, so the Gemara concludes, so ule mitzvah hachinami diboin, and why don't we find anywhere in Torah Shabbat Peh that the shnei kevasim that are brought, shnaim layom eilo samid, lechatchila should be equal? Answers the Gemara, hahu, no. You have to have the extra, right here we had the extra shnei seirim, there was always the shtei tziparim, right, we had over there the shnei kevasim out of order. Of the shnayim layoim, it is not extra. It's used already. And the Braisa writes, shnayim layoim. What do we learn from 2 for the day? That keneged hayoim. Listen to this prat. When you shech the Talmud in the morning and the Talmud in the afternoon, it's not only that they have to be slaughtered during the daytime of the 24-hour day, avada. They have to be slaughtered keneged hayoim. Keneged hayoim means that if it's not cloudy, avada. If the sun is shining, what location in the Azara do you shecht it? In the sunlight and not in the shade. In the sunlight. Parenthetically, it was like a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, we had a beautiful living Torah, Motzoi Shabbos, of a chassid who witnessed the Rebbe during that short period when the Rebbe was in the south of France, if I'm not mistaken, or when he went later to pick up the Rebbe's in Chana. So there was someone that saw the Rebbe davening. He was speaking about the Rebbe was in a shtibel, and obviously there was no air conditioning over there in France. And he says it was a mamish that was like the day that Hashem took out the chamam and artika. It was terribly hot. It was unbearable. And he witnessed something the Rebbe didn't know, that this Yid was looking at him. How the Rebbe went after davening upstairs, even hotter, and it was unbearable. And the Rebbe sat in the sun. I remember him speaking. And the Rebbe davened for many hours. The way the Yid said, he saw the Eibishter and the Rebbe and davening. And it was like the Rebbe was not physically here because it was unbearable. So interesting, I thought about this, that there was an avoida, lachatchila, that the animal has to be geshachtin in the sunlight, not in the shade. Now that will have a technical effect, as we'll speak out in a moment. And let's go by it. Maybe Shnaim Layam means it has to be done during the day. Says the Braisa, vade nisht, because Kishu Oimer, the first white line, es hakeves echot tasem aboiker, it's beferish. The es hakeves hasheni tasem beinu arboyim Harei choivas hayoim is amur. So it means keneged hayoim. And technically it means like this. Now this is something that we'll learn with greater detail in Masechtas Tamid. So Litzvaynoi shel Mizbeach, you had all of those rings and you had the rows of rings, and the rings were there to help you hold the animal down during its shechita. Now, without getting into the rows, just understand the following, especially when it comes to the shechita of the morning tamid, which is done right by sunrise. When the sun is shining, but it's all the way to the east, so then the walls of the Azara, they cast a long shadow, right? In other words, shadows become smaller as the sun goes up. So they would dafka shech the morning tamid in the westernmost ring. Now, there are other details, because when it comes to the rings, we don't only ask east or west, but there's also north or south, closer to the Mizbeach, which is south, because it's the tzvaynai, or further. That detail we're not focusing on now. But the fact that we, lachatchila, needed to shech the morning one in the westernmost ring, the afternoon one in the easternmost ring, that's all because we want for the shechita to happen mamish in the sun and not in the shade of the wall. Let's read it inside. The Talmud shel shacharoi nishchad al keren tzfoinis ma'aravis. Now, don't focus on the tzfoinis. It's not that negeya. It's more about here, the ma'aravis, right? So you hear, whoever can see the picture, so you have a question of, there are 4 rows of rings. So litzfoinis means one north away from the Mizbeach, right? Because I know that we're going from south to north. So the one that's closest to the Mizbeach is the southernmost row of rings. It's the northern. Northern, we learn in Talmud, it means the second row. But again, it's not Negeah for here. What's Negeah here is that the morning one was slaughtered in the westernmost ring of the second row. Why? Because you are the furthest away from the shadow from the wall of the Azara. Al-Tabash Shaniya, that's the second row. And for Shalbein Arbaim, it's going to be on the same row, but it has to be closest to east, which is the furthest away from the western wall of the Azara. Again, to get out of the shadow. And then the Baraisa says that Musafin, done, again. So since the Shnayim Layoim is already used for this Gavaldik Kedin, you have to shecht it in the sunlight. Therefore, it's not available for this lechatchila din that they should be shnavim. So far we have Yom Kippur. We have, I'm going in the order now, the correct order, the Shnei Kivasim that's done by Yom HaShmini, the Shtei Tziparim that's done on the first day. Now the Gemara says, Musafin shel Shabbos vadai tzrichen sheyihu shneim shavin gevaldik. When it comes to every Shabbos, we bring 2 karbanos, they are lambs. It says Shnei Kivasim. Over there, now Rashi has 2 versions, right? That mitzvah that they should be shavin. It's not going to be le'ikuva because there isn't shana ba'akasa la'akiv. So the Gemara concludes that there are 4 karbanos in the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash in which you have this din of Shneim Shavin, and they are all learned because Hashem, instead of just writing Kevasim or Tziparim, right, or Seirim, the Torah writes Shnei or Shtayim v'chulei. Gandik. Okay. Now we're starting a new sugya, and this is phenomenal. And this sugya is going to go into the next daf. What is the sugya? Like we mentioned in the introduction, the Torah happens to write in Achrei Mois. After the Torah finishes recording the avodah of Yom Kippur, I'll just read out the whole pasuk. You can read almost the entire pasuk at the end of Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. It says, "Ish mebeis Yisrael, asher yishchat," whether it is a shiur, whether it is an ox, or kasev. Right? Remember, in the Torah, sometimes it's keveh, sometimes it's kasev. We spoke out to Alter Rebbe on that. Oy eis b'machne. B'machne means a machne levia. Oy asher yishchat michutz lamachne, not even a machne levia, even a machne levia. It's called chutz. You're not in the temple complex. And the Torah adds, "Vel Pesach oil moed loy hevia." You didn't bring it al Pesach oil moed lahakriv karban Hashem, where it should be done lifnei mishkan Hashem. Dam yechashav leishahu, dam shafach, the nichras or ishahu mikarav amo, etc. That's the pasuk. Shchitas chutz is a sin for which a chayiv kares b'mezid, and therefore chayiv chatas b'shoigig. And the nekuda will be that when is a person, God forbid, going to be chayiv shchutei chutz, if that animal could have been, it was fit to be brought, like the pasuk says, el pesach moed, and he didn't bring it al pesach oil moed. But a carbon that's not fit, even though it was designated for a carbon, and of course it should not be slaughtered outside, but if it was done, it's not included in the severity of the sin and in the punishment of shchutei chutz. Okay, with that in mind, Tanach Rabbanan. Let's start. Now we're going to begin the Braisa right now, and we have to remember this Braisa for Daf Samach Gimel. Let's go. Shnei Seidei Yom Kippurim. Both, the one that's Lashem, the one that's Lazazel, Sheshach Aton Bachutz, either one of them was slaughtered outside. So I guess, actually, Higler Aleim, before you made the Goydol, the din is Chayiv al Shneim. Why Chayiv al Shneim? Why Chayiv al Shneim? Right, you're going to say because they are both fit to be brought inside. We got a problem over here. They're not exactly both fit to be brought inside. You know why? Because prior to the Goydol, none of them are fit. The rule of Shchitas Chutz is that that animal was fit to be brought El Pesach Oil Moed. So the Torah writes, if the El Pesach Oil Moed, Lo Yevi, etc., then you chayiv kodesh. But the Braisa begins, before the Goydol, we do consider both of these goats fit. If one shechted either of them b'chutz, chayiv. However, says the Braisa, step number 2, clause number 2, once the Goydol was made, and now we have one that was designated Lazazel, that's also never fit to be brought inside, the Lashem, yeah. So chayiv al shel shem, upater shel Lazazel.
What does it mean that he's chayiv on both?
If he
gets kares twice?
Well, if he did it b'shoigeg, he has to bring 2 chatois, or if he only took one, doesn't matter that we don't know which one is which. They're both included in the din. So if he took one of these 2, he's going to be chayiv, because each one is under this aveda. Don't shecht it b'chutz.
Even though it is vadai, not both of them can actually be.
That's the point. That's the point. That's what we have to analyze. Very good. Very good. No, it's the Reisha has to be explained, and then we'll get to the Sefer. The Reisha is before the Goydol. Here we say on either of them, you're going to be chayiv shchitas chutz. After the Goydol, only Lashem. End of Braisa. Now let's go back to the Reisha. Frek the Gemara, actually, higler aleim chayiv al shneim. You should be chayiv on none of them, because you didn't do the Goydol yet. Lamai chazu, that's the whole point. Lamai chazu. You didn't do the Goydol, you can't do anything with them. Omar Rab Chizda, guys, this is beginning. Says Rab, now we're going to learn on Daf Samach Gimel. There was another version that the statements were made by Rabba. Just to remember that. But we're beginning, and it's going to be the same Gemara. The Gemara doesn't even repeat it. Sometimes it repeats it. There's no repetition, just to be aware that this is version number 1. Amar Rab Chizda. Hoyil v'ra'ui lasoir hanasa b'chutz. One of the steps that we didn't speak about yet is the musaf of Yom Kippur. The normal musaf, it's brought b'chutz, meaning in the azara outside the pnim. The dam is sprinkled on the altar, like by every karban chatas. It's the so'ir of musaf of Yom Kippur. Since prior to the Goydol, if a kohen would take any one of these 2, they were purchased for the Goydol, but they were purchased for the generic chatos, because both Lashem and Lazazel is in the group of achatos. The musaf is also in the category of achatos. They are de facto fit to be brought as a karban musaf. Beautiful. So once they underwent a Goydol, that uprooted it from it being used for the musaf, because one is Lashem, one is Lazazel. Prior to which there's a din of hoyel. And hoyel, again, even though that we're not planning to use it for the musaf, the Beis HaMikdash has another soyer designated, but there is what we call the principle of since. Since it could be used, if it would be used, it would be valid. So we say hoyel, hoyel v'royel soyer that's b'chutz is good. Frek the Gemara, wow. Oy bazoi umayshna la soyer hanasa b'fnim doloi. The mechuser agrala. What are you telling me that what? That the soir hanasa b'fnim. The loy means we don't say we the it can be designated. That's the Braisa's first stanza versus the second stanza. If a goydel didn't happen, it cannot be done b'fnim, right? So oy bazoi, even if you want to say, well, hoyel, it could be brought lachutz. Could you bring the lachutz right now? Can you offer musaf right now? Of course you cannot. You know why you can't? Because the musaf has its designated time. If we're speaking about the two goats, even prior to the Hagrala, that means you didn't bring Lashem. You understand where you're up to in the Avodah? You're up to in the last Pedek's Avodah. You're not up to the Musaf yet. It also cannot be brought. So L'soed Hanase B'chutz Nami Loichazi. Why? Because the Mechasrei Avodas Hayoim. Gavaldik. So we're back to the question. So it's not Ro'ui Lifnim. You are accepting that it definitely cannot be viewed as the one Lashem. That's a given because you didn't do the Goydel. Well, you didn't do all of the prior steps. So here the Gemara says, this will be the last thing we're learning in this year. Now, let me touch these words, and what's very important to appreciate the Moedidikait of the Sugya is learning this with Rashi. So his words are that true, you can't bring it yet, but since it's designated for it to be brought today, so what is the lack? The lack is that we're not up to that step yet, but it's going to be brought today. So today it's going to be brought. It's not called an animal that cannot be brought. It's premature, but it's not halachically premature. Now hold on. How does that differ from the fact that these two animals did not yet undergo the goydel? Why can't Rabbi Chisda say this animal, hoyel v'ro'oi, maybe this animal will be Lashem, maybe it's going to be Lashem, and the Lashem is going to be brought today. Rabbi Chisda does not say that, right? The goydel is also something that's done l'boy bayom, so you have to add some words that Rabbi Chisda doesn't say. So let's look inside the Rashi. Look inside Rashi, the second line under the Gemara. That's the key to the whole sugya. Ein mechusar zman l'boy bayom, like this. This is only said le'inyan so'ir hachitzoin, which is musav. Ein kan, listen to the words, chesroin maise begufay, elo chesroin zman. When it comes to the so'ir of musaf, nothing else will be done with this so'ir that's for musaf. Whether it's the one that you previously designated, whether it's the one that you took bachutz, this could have been brought for musaf, not now. You have to do other steps prior to it, but there isn't anything that needs to be done to it prior for it to be brought on Musaf. The only thing is, it's not yet its time. That is where we have this Gavaldika concept, ein mechusar zman l'boy bayoim. Right? It's only, I'm reading inside Rashi, shadayin lo igia zman ha-musafin. V'zman ha-roi l'boy bayoim. Dein zeh chisarim zman. Abel hagrola, when it comes to the goydel, and you didn't do the goydel yet, that Rashi wants to say, it's not that the goydel is a maise bigufay. You don't make a scratch in the back of the animal. You don't make it into a mum. Maise begufay means a halachic maise begufay, the act of a goydel. And even if you don't have to remember that whole question, you have to pick up both lots. Do you have to put it down? Do you not have to put it down? It's not about whether you have to put the physical lot on the back of the animal that's Lashem. That's not the point. There is a din that each of these goats have to have a goydel done to it. So whenever there is a mitzvah that has to be done to this animal, prior to that avodah, this animal is not fit. It's premature. When it comes to the side of musaf, you can't bring it because other things were not done prior to this one. Those avodas are not being done to the musaf. They dafka have to happen prior to the musaf. The goydel is considered the mitzvah that we have doing with the se'idim. So in the words of Rashi, we'll use this for the next year, it's called a halachic maise begufay. So whenever there is a maise begufay that needs to be done, prior to it being done, that is called not fit. You don't have the maise begufay. And therefore, you can't say hoyel. You don't say hoyel. And indeed, that's the whole chiddush of Rab Chizda. The reason why in the first clause of the Braisa, you will be chayiv shchutei chutz for both of the seirim, not because hoyel, you might end up doing the goydel, it might become fit Lashem. No. Hoyel, that now it's royal musaf. You can't bring the musaf right now, that's not a problem. That's only a time issue. Steps have to be done prior to it, but they all should be done today. And that's the aim. We'll stop here to be continued. Good. Great.
So even though they have nothing to do with the Musaf, they're really been designated to be the two goats for the lottery. The reason why he's chayiv on both of them has to do with the Musaf, nothing to do with the Sar Lashem, Sar Lazazel.
It has to be with that, and as this will be further developed soon, because it's not just that, it's dafka because the Musaf is in the class of Achatos. If the Musaf would have been in another category, then we would never say Hoyel V'Roi.
Well, 1 second, but the Sar Lashem and the Sar Lazazel are also in the category of Chatas, right?
Yes, that's why, since you're not really uprooting it from its designation, and it is fit for Musaf, and even though Musaf cannot be brought right now, but it's not a Maisa Begufay issue, so it's enough Ra'oi for you to say that if they were slaughtered by Chutz, you're Chayiv Kadas or Chatas. That's where we're at. It's good. Okay. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Samach Gimel. We began at the end of last year quoting a Braisa on Daf Samach Beis, Amid Beis. The Braisa spoke about two scenarios. A person took the two seirim that were designated for the avoida of the Pedic to make the goydel. Says the Braisa that if prior to the goydel being done to these two seirim, a person went and shechted either one of them or both of them bachutz. Bachutz means outside the temple complex. And as we will continue to learn, a pasuk in Vayikra and Pashas Acharei Mois, right after the Torah finishes recording the whole avodah of Yom Kippur, the Torah writes that if a korban that was supposed to be brought was brought outside, and the Torah says the words ve'el, Pesach, oil, moyed, loy, heviyoy, and he didn't bring it where it should have been brought, etc. Then v'nichras ha'yishahu. From there we learned that a korban that was ra'ui, fit to be brought inside the oil moed, if it was brought outside, that is where the person b'shegig is chayv chatos, b'mezid is chayv kados. If a korban that was taken designated for a kachin, if it's not yet fit to be brought inside, even though, of course, don't bring it outside, but you won't be violating the shchutei chutz. Says the Braisa clause number 1, that these two seirim that are going to be used for the goydel, if prior to the goydel they were slaughtered outside, you will be chayiv. If the goydel was already made, then the Braisa differentiated. The one that was lashem, if someone slaughtered it outside, chayiv. If the one Lazazel was geschachten outside, pater. And we began, the end of last year was focusing on the first clause of the Braisa. The problem we had is that since the goydel was not yet done, so neither of them can be brought, neither of them can be Lashem, you didn't even do the goydel. How is it fit to be brought inside, which is this criterion that's needed for you to be chai for shchutei chutz? So we quoted Rav Chizda that said like this, you're right, prior to the goydel, neither of them are connected to Lashem as of yet. But since on the day of Yom Kippur, you have the Musaf of Yom Kippur, which comes from a Sa'ir, and this is the same animal type. Furthermore, if these two animals, or one of them, will be used for the Musaf, it's going to be a valid Musaf. So Rav Chizda subscribes to the Hoyel principle, since it could be used for Musaf, even though you know you won't. It's considered fit enough for you to apply the din of shchutei chutz. Then we added a concept that it will be the foundation for the hemshech of the sugya. And that foundation is that there are times that we say that hoyel, and there are times that we don't say hoyel. So far, we are applying it to the following. If something needs to happen to the animal itself, not physically, But halachically, if there is a mitzvah connected to this animal prior to which you can't do the avodah, then we don't say hoyel, even though we will do that mitzvah, and sometime, even today, it's going to be fit. The mitzvah wasn't yet done to it. But if there are things that need to happen prior to bringing the carbon, but it's not a mitzvah connected to this carbon, like we explained, that you can only bring the musaf on Yom Kippur from the soid after you did many steps prior. Those steps prior have to happen, but it's not a mitzvah connected to this goat. This goat only is going to be used after prior steps. Since the musaf is going to be brought today, even before the prior steps happened, we can already say, hoyel, it's fit for today. And therefore, if you slaughtered it outside, you're going to be chayiv. And that was the Rab Chizda's explanation of the Braisa. Now we're going to show where we have other scenarios where we might say hoyel, where we might not say hoyel. And that's going to lead us into a very similar topic, which is something that we spoke about a lot in Masechtas Pesachim, and that is the following. An animal that was designated for a Karban Pesach. If that animal is brought shaloi b'zmanoi, it's not brought on the 14th in the afternoon. So then, let me say like this. If it was brought l'shem shlamim, for sure it becomes a valid shlamim. We will have, again over here, a machloikas between Abdimi's version of Rabbi Yechanan, Ravin's version of Rabbi Yechanan. What happens if it was slaughtered stam? Not l'shem Pesach, not l'shem shlamim. Do we say that any animal that was designated for a Pesach, shaloi b'zmanoi, automatically is uprooted and it is a shlamim, or does it need to be uprooted? And that's all going to be connected to our topic of if this Pesach, let's say, does not need to be uprooted for it to be a valid shlamim, and someone goes ahead and takes this Pesach, shaloi b'zmanoi, and shechts it chutz, he will be chayiv for shchitas chutz because it was ra'ui to be brought as a shlamim. If you're going to ascribe to those who hold that even though a Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi could be made into a shlamim, but you have to make it into a shlamim, and before you uprooting it into a shlamim, it remains a Pesach. A Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi may not be brought, so it's not fit to be brought. Then if you would check this animal bachutz, you won't be chayiv. With another nuance, even if when you shechted it bachutz, you had the machshava l'shem shlamim, you uprooted it, but there's another din that uprooting a carbon bachutz is not an uprooting, so it wasn't uprooted. If it needed to be uprooted and it wasn't, you're going to be putter. So we're going to learn a lot more applications of this din of shchitas chutz and how it only applies to that which is ra'ui, to the el pasach oil moed lo hevioi is the sin. It has to be ra'ui to come into the oil moed. And then on Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, we're going to come back to Yom Kippur. And we're going to be learning that there is a special limud that teaches us that the soid hamishtaleach may not be designated for the soid hamishtaleach if it is a mechusar zman. Now, a mechusar zman means if it is premature. Now, the truth is that you have various premature applications. The most known mechusar zman is a pasuk that we read almost every yontif, Parshas Emor, that all karbanos may not be brought as a carbon during their first 7 days. It's only umiyoyim hashmini ve'hala yeratzel carbon Hashem. What happens if a soid hamishtaleach is not 7 days old? Now we began the Pedic learning that has to be similar, but the Mishnah spoke about not age, we spoke about color, we spoke about height, we spoke about value, financial value. What happens if one animal is going to be 8 days old and the other animal is 7 days old? So even though the soid hamishtaleach is not being slaughtered, we have a limud that teaches us that you cannot designate a premature soid lazazel. The question that we will deal with on Amud Beis with many answers, the question will be, why do you b'chlal need a limud? Don't forget that when you take the two goats, you don't take one for the soid hamishtaleach. You don't take one for the lazazel. You take two and you don't know yet which one is which. And there is a rule that you can only put two animals in the goydol if both of them are fit lashem. If an animal is premature, so it's never fit lashem, so you can never make a goydol. So anyways, a premature animal is excluded from it ever being a soid hamishtaleach. So we're going to deal with the question, why do we have to have a braisa that has a special limit? I mean, the bottom line will be that a premature mechusar zman is not fit for soira mishtaleach. But why do we need a pasuk when it should be self-understood that it's not shaykh? And we're going to have phenomenal out-of-the-box cases where there can be a soira mishtaleach that might not need to undergo a goydel. And therefore, in those unusual cases, one without a limit might have thought, since you're not slaughtering it, so you don't apply that only umayoyim hashmini v'hala yeratzel korban. Nevertheless, the soira mishtaleach is viewed like a korban, and it also has to have the right age. Just to add that premature doesn't only mean under 8 days old. I'll just give you one other example. That will be hopefully we'll get there today, that there's a din in the Torah that oisoi, that the mother and a child may not be slaughtered on the same day. That's a sugya that's not connected to kachim. We learned this in Chulin, whether it's the mother and the child or whether it's the father and the child. How do you define the same day? Or however you define that, you can't slaughter a mother and a child on the same day. It's shaykh that the soyer hamishtalech, after it being designated already to the soyer, the mother was slaughtered. Don't jump chilul yom kippur. If someone was a chayla masukan and the only animal was available to shecht was the mother, you shecht to save a life. Now this is not fit. Now this is also called a mechusar zman. That will be the final gavaldike insight. And that is why we need to have a limit. Just for example, that since it's a mechusar zman, it's not fit for the soira mishtaleach. And what we're going to basically leave off, whether it is at the end of today or coming into tomorrow's daf, is that there will be scenarios where we have many animals. Because if one became unfit, you have to designate a new one, not by replacing the one that was unfit, by bringing two. And then we're going to have to begin unpackaging already the subsequent dafim. What happens with the superfluous animals? Which ones are used? Which ones are not used? Whether it's a yirat sheyistoiv or shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that it's left to die. Okay, Chavra, let us start. This is Gavaldik. We left off 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We just clarified shitas Rab Chizda, differentiating between an animal that has a chesroin maise begufoi, not fit, we don't say hayil, versus a musaf that doesn't have a chesroin maise begufoi, we say hayil. Omar Avina, 3 lines from the bottom. Hashta the Omar Rab Chizda. Now that we established, or we inferred from Rab Chizda, that mechusar hagrala is considered kemechusar maise dami. As we spoke out to Rashi, it's very important, even though you're not doing the goydel in the goof physically, even if you, not only if you need to have even the hanach is not big gufay, but furthermore, many yeshitas hold, you don't even have to put the lottery down on the back of the animal, but it's halachically begufay. So now, the Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, shlamim sheshachatam kadem shentuchodal sisayechal psulin. If a shlamim was slaughtered before the Pesach of the Azara was opened, it's invalidated because it says, and this is going back to the beginning of Vayikra, the shachatoi Pesach oil moyed. Pesach means it has to be slaughtered in the passageway of the oil moyed. It has to be an open for it to be a passageway. It's not a door; it's a passageway. And we learned bismanshu pasuach v'le bismanshu no daf isamach gimel zokt. The Gemara says, Ravina, that if you took the shlamim and shachaton bachutz koidem sheniftechu dalsa sahechol, you will be pater. Why will you be pater? My tama, because mechusar pesicha ke mechusar ma'asadami. Guys, it flows based on the Rashi. Rashi explains that fit or unfit, when we say hoyel, when we don't say hoyel. We don't say hoyel if there is a mitzvah that's connected to this carbon. The din that a shlamim can only be geshachten when the dalsois azara are open is a din in the shlamim. It's not touching the shlamim. It's a din in the shlamim. Just a contrast. The din that the soil of Musaf of Yom Kippur can only be brought at its designated time and not prior. It's not a din. There is no mitzvah in the Musaf. Or let me word it differently. When you went through all the steps on Yom Kippur, and now you are up to the Musaf of the Soyer of Yom Kippur, those previous steps are not here. They were done already. They're not here. The din that the door has to be open when you bring the shlamim, it's a din that when you bring the shlamim, the door has to be opened. So it's a mitzvah connected to this shlamim, not what needed to happen prior. It's not like you opened up the door, you fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not about the opening of the door. It's about the effect that the passageway is now a passageway. You got that? That's Tosfos Yeshanim on the next daf explaining this. So this is considered a mitzvah begufay. Or if it's a mitzvah begufay and it's lacking, so you cannot bring it inside, so you're not chayev. How great. The holding of hoil. I mean, whenever you don't need a mitzvah begufay. Don't forget the original answer of Rab Chizda explaining the first clause of the Braisa. The Braisa says that before the Geidel, if you shechted either of them achutz or both, you're chayiv, right? You can't be chayiv. You're chayiv two chatois b'shoigeg. You didn't do the Geidel. Hoil, they are ra'ui for the musaf, but you have to subscribe to the principle of roi. Forget about it, it's not begufay. It's not begufay, which is why you can subscribe to it. That will be a stira bein Rab Chizda le Rab Chizda. This is all the first version, that the first statement was Rab Chizda, and this statement is Rab Chizda. Pesach sheshachatoy bachutz b'shari yemais hashana. You have a korban Pesach. Let's go back to Pesachim. And that animal, if you will not bring it on the 14th bisman Pesach, so either it's automatically a shlamim. That will be the whole nuance difference between the next couple of lines in the Gemara. You certainly could bring it l'shlamim, so it's fit. So it says, Rab Chizda said that if you brought it l'shmai, you had in mind l'shem Pesach bachutz. Well, that animal lepesach bifnim is for sure not fit because it's not an erev Pesach, and therefore you're pater because it's not to ra'oi to bring it al Pesach oilmai. But if we're going to focus now, this is all Rashi's girsa, we're going to focus on this last statement of Rab Chizda. If you brought it bachutz shaloi lishmai, now if you would have brought it bifnim shaloi lishmai, it would have been a bona fide shlamim. It's ra'oi to be brought, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. End of quote of Rab Chizda. Now we're going to focus on the last statement of Rab Chizda. I know that if you were to focus on the first statement, you would come to an opposite conclusion, and that's a big problem. And Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, but we don't have time for that. Let's focus Gemara Rashi. Taima, the last statement. The shaloi l'shmai. That is when you're chayiv. What does that imply? Let's only make the inference from the Sefer. Even though Rashi is goydis the Reish. Tosfos is not even goydis the Reish. That hastama, if you bring it bachutz without any intention, right, then lishmoi, who it sounds like it remained lishmoi, remains a Pesach, and therefore you're pater. But if Rab Chizda subscribes to hoil, which he does, va'amai lema, why don't we say hoil v'roi shaloi lishmoi b'fnim? Clearly, shaloi lishmoi, he himself said, is going to be chayiv. So even though it was tam, but it's ra'ui. Great question. So does Rab Chizda subscribe to the principle of hoil or not? Answers the Gemara, hachiyashta, gavaldig. Over there, meaning by Pesach, this is based on the premise, which will a machloikas, but that's his shita, that if you don't purposefully have a machsheves shaloi lishmoi by a Pesach shaloi bezmanoi, it remains a Pesach. Don't think, and a Pesach shaloi bezmanoi is not roi. You could uproot it, but you need to uproot it. Boi akira, it needs uprooting. And since you did not uproot it, it's not fit. We can't say hoil. Over here, we're speaking about by the so'ir, even though you purchased it for the goydels se'irim, but you don't need to uproot it to use it for musaf, because both goats, La Shem and La Zazel, are called achatos, and as is the musaf, the so'ir, on Yom Kippur is oichet achatos. Hi, loy boyi akira. So since it doesn't need uprooting, that's why, yes, Rab Chizda uses the principle of hoil. And this next line, we're not changing anything. The Gemara doesn't have to repeat anything, but this problem of Rab Chizda's answering the first clause of the Braisa, the contradiction of Rab Chizda's statement regarding the Pesach, others, Rabba, Barshimi, Masne, Lohu, everything was Rabba. It was Rabba that entered the ratio of the Mishnah by saying the words Hoyel v'royel l'soir anasa b'chutz, and then v'kashilei the Rabba ad the Rabba, and then they had the Rabba saying this statement that Pesach shashachatei b'chutz etc. Shaloi l'shmoi chayev. from where we make the inference that if it was stama, you'll be potted. And the answer will be the same. Okay. Now, the hemshech is gavaldik. The whole answer, stated Rab Chizda or Rabba, is predicated that you need to make akira. The Gemara is going to, in between the lines, show you not everyone subscribes that it needs akira. And we learned to Simsachim. There are those who opine that a Pesach, Shaloi Bizmanoi, is already a Shlamim. And by the way, according to those opinions, if you bring it stama, bachutz, you'll take a bichayiv. You'll be chayiv because it's a shlamim that is roi to be brought bifnim. Now, how did that question manifest like this? Rav Dimi used to come to Bavel, and it's how common is it? Very common that after we quote that which Rav Dimi brought from Teiras Eretz Yisrael, a few lines later, we're going to have a Ravan coming with a different version, all quoting Rabbi Yechanan. Go on. So Chiyos Rav Dimi, Omar Rav Yirmiyah, Omar Rav Yechanan, Pesach sheshachatu bachutz, b'shari yemais hashana. Listen to his version. Bein lishmoi, bein shaloi lishmoi, always spotted. Wow. And Omar Rav Dimi, that I want you to know that I'm nita lishmoi tzakamed Rabbi Yirmiyah. And what was asked, because he quoted Rabbi Yirmiyah quoting Rabbi Yechanan. So when Rabbi Yirmiyah was teaching that, so the Chevra jumped and they said, Bishloima lishmoi, we get it. If you shech the carbon, Pesach, Shaloi Bizmanoi, Lishmoi, Bachutz, yeah, you're potted. Hoil, the hallway chazi lay, because it's not fit to be brought inside. But if someone is going to bring this carbon, right, which is B'shari Yemai Sashana, and they have in mind Shaloi Lishmoi, then why would you be exempt? Ha-chazi lay Shaloi Lishmoi B'fnim. Right? So Amar Li, so Rabbi Yechanan or Rabbi Yirmiyah responded, explaining the Torah of his Rabbi Yechanan, no. All based on the premise, this version, that it has to be uprooted. And even though the one who brought it bachutz had a machsheves shaloi l'shmoi, any uprooting that's done bachutz is completely ignored. It has no significance. Akiras chutz, lav shmo akira. And based on the premise that it has to be uprooted, and what you had in mind bachutz is insignificant, it's discounted. So what is it? It's a Pesach. A Pesach is not ro'ui to be brought b'fnim. And therefore, if you bring it b'chutz, you're potter. So all of this is based on the concept that a Pesach, b'shari yemais hashana, needs to be uprooted. However, Kiyasa Ravin, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Gavaldik, the same Rabbi Yirmiyah, quoting the same Rabbi Yechanan, no, differently. Pesach, sheshachatu b'chutz b'shari yemais hashana, min hakatza l'hakatza, even more than Abchizda or than Abba. Bein lishmai, bein shaloi lishmai. I don't care what you had in mind b'chutz. You will always be chayiv. Frekti Gemara, afil lishmai. What are you talking about? V'atanan. This is the Mishnah Chevra that we have in Zevachim. Now, the Mishnah in Zevachim is speaking about the example that we are using to show you that shchitas chutz is only a violation of kares and chatos if it was fit to be brought inside. One of the fit is it cannot be premature. It cannot be mechusar zman, which generally means it's not 8 days old. So that was the first din in the Mishnah, that if you took a carbon and you slaughtered it outside, but it is premature, right, you're not going to be chayiv. And now the Mishnah elaborates. What's pshat mechusar zman? Mechusar zman, whether it is begufay, like we said, it's not 8 days old yet, or beba'alim, the animal is old enough, but the time to bring it has not yet arrived. And the Mishnah explains, so gewaldic examples, Azav, and Azava, and a Yeledis, and a Mitzayra. Some of them have to wait 7 days, right? There's a Seder until when? When do you bring it on the 8th day? The 8th day didn't come. So the owner cannot bring it yet. So let's go. If Sheikrivu Chatasam Ba'ashamam Bachutz, a detail, that is when they're potted. We're saying that detail because a carbon, oila, and a dava can always be brought b'fnim, even if it's coming from a zav. He cannot bring his mechusrei kippurim karbonos prior to the right time. So what's called mechusras man ba'olim karbonos that can never be made into an adava. But oiloi say hen of the above, ushlamei hen of the above, even though that he had designated these karbanos for the chisur kippurim, but since they could be brought now b'fnim, b'chutz chayav. Atkan, the Mishnah in Zvachim, and v'amar Rab Chilkiya bar Toivi, that when the Mishnah said that the asham that's brought bachutz is spotted, loishanu elo l'shmoi. Wow. But if it was brought bachutz shaloi l'shmoi, now Chevra, let's nacham al chazer, the first opening shot of the whole Zvachim. The Mishnah says that kol asvachim, if you shechted it shaloi l'shman, for example, if you shechted an asham l'shem oila, so even though they're loy olu leba'alam l'shem chayva, but they're kshedim, they become an oila. So Rab Chilkiya added that if you had a machsheva shaloi l'shmoi, by the asham, since it becomes an oila, you're right, going to be chayiv. Okay, and now asks the Gemara, this is all how we are challenging this latter version of Amar Rabbi Yechanan l'shmoi miya pater. Everyone holds that if you bring the asham or the chatzas l'shmoi pater, why? Amai nema hoyel v'ra'uyin shaloi l'shmoi bifnim. They also could have been brought, like Rab Chilkiya is saying, bifnim shaloi l'shmoi. No, we're speaking about the asham. I want to make that clear because a chatos and a pesach, if they are brought shaloi l'shma, they're b'chlal invalidated. So here the Gemara is going to bring a similar answer that we said to farenfer the stira Rab Chizda, or the stira Rabba Naba. So answers the Gemara Hachiyashta over there, which is by the asham. You need to have akira. Prior to akira, it's not fit. Over here, the real underlying different girsa of Ravin versus Rav Dimi is like we spoke out. A Pesach b'shar Yemois Hashana, Ravin holds that Rav Yirmiyah, Rav Yechanan hold, it doesn't need to be uprooted. It's automatically a shlamim. Hacha Pesach b'shar Yemois Hashana, automatically a shlamim. Now, do we accept Rav Dimi's version or Ravin's version? Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi masna chayiv bein l'shmoi bein shaloi l'shmoi, not like Ravin. And Rav Yirmiyah midifti has Rav Dimi's version, pater, both scenarios. Why? Like we learned above, because he holds Pesach b'shar Yemois Hashana is not automatically a shlamim. It could be made into a shlamim by Akira. And even both cases, not Rab Chizda's versions, Rav Dimi's version, even if Itaka had in mind Shaloi L'Shmoi, or that was an Akira, he also subscribes that Akira's Chutz, Lav Shema Akira. And he obviously argues with Rab Chilkiya bar Tuvi, because Rab Chilkiya bar Tuvi said that when the Mishnah in Zvachim says that if the Asham is brought, you're going to be pater. However, he says that if you bring the Asham Bachutz, Shaloi L'Shmoi, it makes it into an oila, and your chayiv, obviously, Rav Chilkiya bar Tuvi holds that a machsheves of akira bachutz is valid. Okay, gewaldig. Now let's come back to Yom Kippur. So Amar Mar, we learned in the Braisa. We're going back to the Braisa that we learned at the end of last year. At Kan, we explained, my friends, the first clause of the Braisa. Again, the Braisa writes that both of the Seirim of Yom Kippur, if both of them, or either one of them, were slaughtered bachutz, said the Braisa, actually, Higril Chayev al Shneim. And for that, we needed to have this Gavaldike explanation. Taka, you're not Chayev because one of them could have been the Soil Hashem. No one says that. Because you need to do a Maise Begufoi, which is the Goydel. Why are you Chayev? That was the whole beauty, Rab Chizda or Rabba, because it could have been brought for the Soil of Yom Kippur. Not now. You have to wait. But Chesra in Boy Bayoim is not called a Chesra. Then the Braisa added clause number 2 that we're going to go back to. What was the second case? The Braisa says that Misha Higral Aleim, I'm reading the Braisa, that Chayiv shall shame upater shel azazel. Why are you pater shel azazel? That's the din. Because since this animal was designated la azazel, it may no longer be brought b'fnim. When does Hashem say that if you shech an animal b'chutz, you chayiv kares, or God forbid chatos, that if it was ra'oi lehadiyoi el pesach oyel moi? That's what we're going to learn right now. Amar Mar. Chayiv al shel shem upater al shel azazel. So what's the source? That if it's not fit, we keep on quoting it, but that's the source. So Tanach Rabbanon, it's Gavalik. This is Vayikra Yud Zayin is also Achrei Mois. It's not about Yom Kippur. This is about all korbanos. The pasuk begins, Ish mebeis Yisrael, Asher Yishchat, whether it is a shoir, an ox, a cow in that kind of bakar category, or a kesev, sheep, or yez, or a goat. B'machne chevra chumash Rashi. B'machne means a machne levia. Machne levia means It was very close to the temple, but it wasn't in the temple. It wasn't in the Beis Hamikdash. Or even worse, it's really the same thing. Oy, asher yishchat michutz lamachne, out of machne leviyah. It's both the same that it wasn't geshachten the el pesach oil moed lohevi. Here pesach oil moed means it wasn't done in the right place. Lahakriv karben lashem. These are seemingly extra words. I just want to add, the pasuk writes, Lifnei Mishkan Hashem, Dam Yechashev Lo Ishahu, Dam Shafach V'Nichnas. That's the pasuk, Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis. So now, as we mentioned, that the Torah writes, Vel Pesach Al Moed Lo Yaviyoi, Lahakriv Karben Lashem. Why did the pasuk have to write the words Lahakriv Karben Lashem? Now, what the Gemara is doing over here is it's Pashat skipping a part of a brisa. When the Gemara was written, it was expected that we should know it by heart. By the times of Rashi, we don't know it by heart. We have to read the Rashi. Pashat, if not, you won't understand what we're talking about. When the brisa knows, before we read the words I Karben Shemei Ani, it's not going to flow. Look inside the Rashi. I Karben Shemei Ani. So he said like this: Reisha the brisa b'Toras Kahanim hache is. The first thing the brisa says is Yochel hashoichet chulin bifnim yehei chayiv. The pasuk is speaking about shchitas kachim bachutz. You would think that if you take a non-consecrated animal bifnim, you're going to be chayiv. Why would you think it's chayiv? The brisa has a din. The brisa has a kal v'chomer. Whatever the kal v'chomer is, it's not negeat techap. So the brisa answers, that's why it says karben. We were saying the words lahakriv karben Hashem. Why do you have to write that? You wrote the el pesach al moed lo yaviyoi. Good. So the Torah is telling you karben to tell you that al hakarben hu chayiv. The ena chayiv al chulin. That's the exclusionary limud from karben, that chulin bifnim is asur, but there's no chiyuv kares. Now asks the brisa, top of the line, how do you know that the karben is coming to exclude the punishment for chulin bifnim? Maybe karben, maybe yechayev on chulin bifnim. Not only a yechayev for kachim achutz, kares, chatos, and chulin bifnim, maybe karben is coming to add even a greater sin. That if the bedek habayis has a karben that was never designated for the mizbeach, someone donated an animal. And by the way, we're going to learn in kachim that really lechatchila one should never donate an animal to the bedek habayis if it's unblemished and fit for the mizbeach. Don't do that. But if one did it, it become consecrated. Now, if someone were to take such an animal and to shecht it outside, asks the brisa, maybe Hashem adds the words by lahakriv karban to tell you that you're also chayiv kares. 1 second. Where do we find that an animal that's not laguf, not la mizbeach, no, where do we find that it's called karban? One time in the whole Torah. In Parshas Matis, after we won the war against the Midyanim, and the Torah is speaking about the animals that we got, and we divided the spoils, so we gave a gift to the Kahanim, and the Torah uses the words karban. One time we find a karban on an animal that is not imbued with Kedushas Aguf, Kedushas Mizbeach. So asks the Brisa, if you only have the word karban, maybe Shemei Ani, not only don't use it to exclude Chulan Bifnim, maybe include Afilu Kachem Bedek Habayis, which are called karban Ke'inyan Shenemar, that one time in Parshas Matos, Vanakriv es karban Hashem. So how do you know that you are using the word karban to exclude Chulan Azara? So Talmud Leimer, so we go back. Before you have the word karban, it says Vel Pesach Oil Moyed Loy Hevi Oy. Now that implies that this pasuk is only speaking about Kol Haroi LePesach Oil Moyed, not a karban lebedek habayis, not a chulin animal. Only on such an animal, which is a bona fide karban, chayiv alav bachutz. And kol she'ein haroi LePesach Oil Moyed, ein chayavin olav bachutz. That is the source for the din, for the second clause in the Braisa, that after the Goydel, the So'ir La'azazel is not the royal Pesach Chayil Moed. It's supposed to be pushed off the cliff. And tak, if someone slaughtered that animal, bachutz, which he shouldn't have, he won't be chayiv kares, he won't be chayiv chatas. Now let's continue learning the Braisa. However, still the Braisa itself asks, so all I did was I excluded that the word karban doesn't mean bedek habayis. But how do you know? We're going to skip paras chatas. That's not the girsa. Rashi takes it out. Oh, maybe the Soyer HaMishtaleach who was slaughtered outside. The Brais is asking, maybe you should be chayiv kares chatos. Why is that? Why is that? Because who ra'ui lavay al pesach oyel moyed oy gewalt. How is it ra'ui? Not to shecht it, not to shecht it. Where is the geidel done, my friends? We learned this in the last perakim. The geidel is done inside the oyel moyed azara. It's done in the azara. Gevaldik. More than that, not only is the geidel done over there, but as we are going to learn soon, before the ish iti took the soyer hamishtaleyach, the kohen gadol did smicha on it, and he needed to do it inside the azara. So enochanami, it's not going to be slaughtered, but the Torah doesn't say the word slaughter. The Torah says vel pesach oyel moyoid loy hevioi. The soyer hamishtaleyach needs the hevioi el pesach oyel moyoid gevaldik. Roy means it has to taka, not only fit. So now the Braisa adds the extra words wasn't only lahakriv karban. The Torah says lahakriv karban lashem, weiter an extra word. Why lashem? Lashem means not only you're going to do something with it in the azara. Karban lashem means misha meyuchadim. Lashem means as a karban, as sacrificing it, shechting it in the azara. Yatsu elu. Again, whether it's going to paraschatos or not, let's focus on the soyer mishtaleach she'ein miyuchadim lashem. Beautiful, clear that the soyer mishtaleach after the geidel, if someone slaughtered it b'chutz, you're not chayiv for shchitas chutz. Asks the Gemara. This limud of the Braisa uses lashem to exclude the soyer mishtaleach. That goes 180 degrees to another Braisa that uses the lashem to include a soyer hamishtaleyach. Where's that? Lashem lohoitziu v'riminu parshas emoir. When the pasuk is speaking about this din of mechusar zman, the classical mechusar zman is that the Torah says that for the first 7 days all animals should be with their mothers. It's only umiyoim hashmini v'hala yeratze lekarban lashem. So when it says Yiratz al-Karban, Isha Lashem. So Isha, a fire, Eilu Isha, right? That when you burn something on the Mizbeach, right, it has to be 8 days old. Okay, maybe don't bring it when it's 8 days old. Can you sanctify an animal prior to it being 8 days old? You're not going to bring it then. Can you do that? No, because the Torah says Yiratz le-Karban. So the word Karban, which did not need to be written, it could have says Yeratze Isha Lashem, is coming to teach you that even the act of consecration should only be done when it's 8 days old. Then adds the Braisa Lashem Oigavald. It says LeKarban Isha Lashem. That's Leraboy Soyer HaMishtaleach. That what? That a Soyer HaMishtaleach that is less than 8 days old cannot be a Soyer HaMishtaleach. And we spoke out in the intro. That will be the end of Daf, going into Daf Samach Daled. Why would we even think it's possible? Forget about that question. Lashem is including Soyer HaMishtaleach in this din. Has to be 8 days old for Soyer HaMishtaleach. So is Lashem excluding or is Lashem including? And the answer is so fundamental. It depends on the context. It depends on the context. Amarava hacha minyana dekra, hasa minyana dekra, v'hacha minyana dekra. Hasam over there, it's our din. Hasam means the shchitei chutz. When the Torah writes ve'el pesach oyel moyed, and we said that's lerabois lashem lerabois. So now that there's another word, if you're going in one direction and God adds a word, it's to change course. So lashem will be lohoitzi. And indeed, it's not only el pesach oyel moyed; it has to be el pesach oyel moyed lashem. And if a soyer mishdalech was b'shachtem b'chutz, you won't be chayiv. But over here, meaning in the din of the Bayom Hashmini, since leisha is lahoitzi, that you cannot burn it if it's 7 days old, right? And you cannot burn it, and you would have thought only something that will be burnt is included, and you therefore would have thought that the soyer mishdalech is not included. So now the lashem is lerabos. Okay. But that's a detail. Context will tell you whether some words are going to be used to include or to exclude. But now that we mentioned this Lashem, so clearly we're speaking about that shchutei chutz not chutei chutz, mechuser zman, that a soir mishtaleach is included in the din of mechuser zman. Why did we even need that? Fragt die Gemara, Tamed de Rabbi Rachmana, Holy Rabbi, if not for that extra lashem, in this context is to include, what's the havamina? That a soira mishtaleach could become consecrated even if it is mechusar zman. How is that even shaykh? Don't forget, you don't designate an animal to be la'azazel. You get two seirim. They have to undergo the goydel. You don't know which one is going to win the goydel. And there's a klal. Both animals have to be fit for the lashem. Clearly, the lashem is only 8 days old. That's for sure included in Yeratza Lakarman Isha Avada. So, we know that the Soira Mishtaleach will have to be at least 8 days old. So, why do you have to have a pasuk to include it in the prohibition? And we're going to have various approaches. Let's go. We have enough time. Approach number one, Amar Rabbi Yosef, that this Braisa must follow the Shita of Chanana Mitzri. Unlike our Mishnah, now we're going to start going back to the Mishnah that we had in the beginning of the Perek and Daf Samach Beis. The Tanya, Chanana Mitzri. What did we learn in Rabbi Yehuda? Right, if one of them, if the dam spills out, if the soira mishtaleach dies, it's all invalidated. Chanana Mitzri says like this: Afilu dam bekois. You know, dam bekois is you made the geidel, the soira lashem, you did the shchita, you already slaughtered it, the blood is in the mizrak. What happens, Chevra held cup, if now that the blood is in the mizrak, the la'azazel dies? You can only use the dam of the soira lashem when its counterpart is living. So right now, the dam is unfit. Right now, it's dachui, it's rejected. Could it be rectified? Now, when we learned Daf Samach Beis, we already spoke out that Bechlal in the cases of the Mishnah, whenever you do have to take another pair and make a new geidel, and the Mishnah says that Hasheni Yida Ache Yistoiv, that has to be clarified. What does our Mishnah hold? Which one is the Sheni? But coming back to our case of Chanana Mitzri, so the soil Lashem is good, the blood is in the cup, the soil Azazel dies. So says Chanana Mitzri, maybe Chaveroi Umezaveg Olav. It sounds like all you need to do is to bring one new animal as the soil Mishtalech. That's what the Havamina is. Now, the chiddush of Chanana Mitzri is that we don't say hoil v'nitcha nitcha. We don't say that since before you have a new soil azazel, for sure the dam cannot be brought. So it underwent a moment of rejection. Chanana Mitzri holds that if you rectify the reason why it was rejected, you reinstate it. You can use the dam. Opposite Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah of Samach Beis that holds the dam has to be poured out. The Havamina was Rabbi Yosef's understanding in Chanana Mitzri is you don't even have to make a new geidel. Now it's gavaldik. So in this case, according to Chanana Mitzri, right, you know the whole din is that when you ein ha geidel kaiveya ela b'roy lashem, there's no geidel here. Without the extra lashem, which includes the isur of mechusar zman to the soira mishtaleach, one might have thought that the soira mishtaleach can be brought when it's 7 days old. Gavaldik. For that, you need the limit. The Gemara rejects this answer. You know why? Because we don't understand Chanana Mitzri with the way we just explained it. The chiddush of Chanana Mitzri is that something can become nitcha, and then it can become re-included. But how do you get a soy la'azazel? Even Chanana Mitzri holds, you have to bring two, and you have to make a new geidel. And one will be la'azazel. The one la'azazel will be the shidduch of the dam bakois, according to Chanana Mitzri. Okay, let's come over here. It says the Gemara, Ema the Shaman Chanana Mitzri is only that he does not agree with Rabbi Yehuda to the concept of the choyin that we'll speak about in next year. The choyin, everyone holds that while there is no soil la'azazel, the dam lashem is dachoy. No one debates that. Question is, can you reinstate it? Can you rectify it? So Rabbi Yehuda says no, and Chanan says yes. But the leis lei hagrala mishamat lei. Chanana Mitzri never said you just buy one so'ir. No. Dilma, maisi, umagro. Chanana Mitzri, why would you hold on like we learned in our Mishnah? You bring two animals and you make a geidel. And here we're back to our question. The moment you have to bring two animals, and we have this klal that we said before that ain't hageidel kaveya ela b'royal Hashem, and royal Hashem, which is isha, for sure has to be moyim hashmini. So b'derech mamela, azazel will be included in the prohibition. Next answer. Ella Amar Rabbi Yosef, he accepted that he didn't understand good pshat and Charan HaMitzri. Must be that the Braisa that uses Lashem, right, to include La Rabbi Soira Mishtaleach follows the sheet of Rab Shimon. And Rab Shimon explicitly says that Meis Echad Mehem, that means you made the goydel, and either one of them died, I don't care which one died, Rab Shimon disagrees with our Mishnah Daf Samach Beis. All he says is, Mevi Chaveroi Shloi Ba'agrola. So in the case where the one La'azazel died, all you need to do is, you have to bring a new animal La'azazel. Now, Rab Shimon is Gavaldi, because Rab Shimon doesn't say you don't need a goydel. Of course you need a goydel. You made a goydel. He says that the Hagrola that was made is extended to the replacement. No, it's the dead animal, so to say, the goydel that was done to it is passed on. The baton is passed on to the new one. Now, here you have to have, according to Rab Shimon, a limud that this side of Mishnah has to be 8 days old because you're not making a goydel on it. Gavaldik. So that's the first accepted answer, or the second answer that's brought down. Ravina Amar, another approach. Gavaldik Kigoin show humam v'chiluloi al acher. What's this muhumam v'chiluloi acher? Let's look inside Rashi. 3-4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Ravina Amar ki it's the kra the mechuser zman kigoin show humam hamishtalech. Another din. The mishtalech got a blemish. When after mishahigral olav. What do you do now? L'kula alma. He's saying you don't make a goydel. He says v'chiluloi al acher. All you need to do is bring one animal and make a chilul. And look, not over in Rab Shimon. Second to last line of the Amid. V'zeh ein sarich lahagril because shaharei mikoya charishin ba. In other words, the first one dies. That's Rab Shimon. That says you don't have to make a new goydel. If the first one is living and you only cannot use it la'azazel because it has a balmum. And how do you know that a balmum is not fit? We'll see soon in the Gemara. Here, you don't have to make a new goydel. And therefore, if not for the Lashem, which l'raboi soira mishtaleach, one might have thought it can be 7 days, 6 days. It doesn't have to be 8 days old. Now we just have to say, how do you know that if the Azazel becomes blemished, who says it's a problem? Now, obviously, guys, before you did the goydel, none of the Seirim could have had a blemish, because of the same rule that ein hagoydel korveya ela b'roy Lashem, and anything that's going on the mizbeach may not be a balmum. But after the goydel, how do you know that there's an issue? So says the Gemara, Mina Temra, the pasuk the Tanya, but it says v'isha, the same pasuk, loy sitnu mehem. Not this is a pasuk regarding blemished animals. So it says, and to fire don't place. So the fire means that goes Elyahu chalavim, the parts of an animal of a balmum, which ones go to the fire? The ones that are, all of it goes to the fire. By all the other korbanos, at least the chalavim go to the fire. Says the Braisa Vaitiv, Ainli Elokula, maybe if the Torah wouldn't have added the words mayhem, only loisitnu, one erroneously would have thought that what balmum may not be put on the fire, only if you put all of the chalavim. As a havamina. How do you know that Elokulim, but miksasan, if you're only going to put a kazayas on the fire, how do you know that this is also included in this biblical isur? Because the Torah doesn't say loisitnu, it says loisitnu mayhem, from it, any part of it. Then when it says mizbeach, that goes to the rizrikas damim, that if you zoirik the dam of a behema balmum, that's included in the isur. Then when it says lashem nachamol, here the lashem is to include l'rabbi soira mishtaleach. One might have thought it's not going on the fire at all. Maybe I don't care if it's blemished. So you have a befedish pasuk that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of a balmum. Now with chaps that you have lashem, you have a pasuk that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of mechuser zman. You have another lashem that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of balmum. And the Gemara wants to know, why wouldn't we know one from the other? Because each one is unique. And v'itzrach lemichtav balmum, v'itzrach lemichtav mechuser zman. Because the because of rachman mechuser zman, I would have thought there's a way of saying that each one is worse. That's completely out. Of course, has to be 8 days old. Abel balmum, the matizmane. Maybe it's about age. How chashuv age is. Bist a balmum, but at least bist a azaken balmum. Because rachman balmum, then I would have thought, Balmum is worse because it's Mos. It's a Balmum. Abel Mechusar Zman, it's going to be fit tomorrow, so maybe even now it's good. Deloy Mos Emaloi. So that's why you needed to have Lashem in both cases. The point that Avina makes is you don't have to go to Rab Shimon. Lakula Alma, if the Soida Mishtalech is alive, but it gets blemished, you only have to bring one substitute. And that's why you might have thought, don't run away, one more answer. And the last answer, Rabbi Amr, we spoke it out in the intro. Why are you limiting Mechusar Zman to 7-8 days old? There's another type of Mechusar Zman. That's the Isur of shechting the mother and the child on the same day. You have two seir. You made the goydel. You made the goydel. Now, it's not that the Soida Mishtaleach became blemished. No. What happened is that the mama from the Soida Mishtaleach, the animal, belonged to Chaim Yankel. Chaim Yankel was obligated to save someone's life because they're ill, they need to eat. And there is a din that until this man of however you count the same day, that time has to pass. On Yom Kippur, the time did not pass yet. Without the Lashem, you would think you can take the Soida Mishtalech as it is. Doesn't have a blemish. You're not shechting it. So why is it Mechusar Zman? That is the Lashem. The problem with Rava is, why would we even think that the Lashem in Parshas Emoid is excluding that Parsha speaking about 7-8 days old? This animal is 8 days old. How do you know that Hashem includes it? Why? All you're doing is you're pushing it off the cliff. Maybe that should not be included in the Lashem, the high lav shchitahi. So we're going to conclude today's shiur by saying this nisht emes. The way we understand the avoida of the Soida Mishtaleach, it's not only called a chatos, it's more than that. Ein v'shachat elo umashach is something that we celebrate in Chassidus. In other words, the avoida of umashach by the Soida Mishtaleach is done when you push it off the cliff. Pushing it off the cliff is its act of shchita. That dichiyasei latzuk, pushing it off the cliff, this is its shchita. So yes, it's called shchita. And therefore, it is going to be included with the Lashem that you may not bring the Soida Mishtaleach. Givaldik. And now where we are up to is we're going to go back to the Mishnah of Samach Beis. The Mishnah spoke about scenarios where you needed to bring two other animals to make a new geidel. You're going to have one of the two, the one that is alive, is going to be doubled. The Mishnah says, Hasheni Yida Ache Yistoif, and what's not clear is which one is the Sheni. Is the first the Sheni or is the second the Sheni? To be continued. Great. Yoma.